So what is good computer-assisted note-taking? This is a service that I have provided. It's a rare thing to be requested. And who uses the service? Well, largely, computer-assisted note-taking is very useful to late deafened adults. They grew up as a hearing person, something happened, illness, a trauma, accident, injury, or they have a condition where they've lost their hearing progressively and have now become deaf enough that hearing aids aren't helping them to communicate with the hearing world anymore. So they still have retained their ability to speak, but the problem is when they speak, people think that they can understand a response, and then the other person speaks back, and they're not. These people are not skilled lip readers, and therefore, or even if they are a skilled lip reader, it's a struggle. Even if you're a skilled lip reader, it's a struggle. And so they wish to have some other service than sign language interpreting because they don't know sign language. They may not even acknowledge themselves as being deaf. They might use the label hearing impaired, hard of hearing, but something other than deaf because they don't even want to acknowledge this. And so it might even be a very emotional, traumatic thing for them to finally accept that they should learn some sign language. Well, how do you serve these people's needs? Well, computer-assisted note-taking is readily available. Most people anymore have a laptop. Anyone can do it, but it helps to have a little bit of training so that you can do it effectively and you know what to look for. And so good computer-assisted note-taking happens in the room that the communication event is taking place. Let's say that somebody decides to do a non-credit, I don't know, some kind of hobby training. We're taking a pottery class or a wine painting class, which usually is a one-off thing. You bring your bottle of wine, you bring your glass, they provide the paint, and then you do your whatever your artwork is on your wine glass, and they tell you to make the glass, and you have your artwork, and you go home. I know you have somebody else is a designated driver for that class. Great. So the examples that I will be using to train you are going to be instructive material, how to do something, so that there are natural pauses, there are visual aids, there's something to look at, there might even be lists or text on the screen. Now, here's the difficulty. If you're typing, your chances of being right on top of the message are slim. You're likely to be delayed in your processing. And so if the speaker says, this is more important than that, well, by the time they've pointed to this and that, they're now on to other things by the time you've typed the words this and that. You should be looking at what they're pointing at when those words appear, so that you can replace the words this and that with enough description that the deaf person can know what this was and what that was. So this picture of a dog is more important than that picture of a piece of pottery. And so I need to type that information out. But there is a pressure on me to keep up. And therefore, another thing that good computer-assisted note-taking relies on is the fact that most of our consumers are native users of English. And they can abbreviate and understand abbreviations quite well. And so instead of typing out the whole word apartment, you can type out APT, period. Number, if you can do the pound sign quickly and find that on the keyboard, you can do that. You might put an NO period, although sometimes that just means no. It's at the end of the sentence. So be careful, be aware of what your message looks like, and read it back when you're done, see if it makes sense. Good computer-assisted note-taking could be a replacement for having a secretary doing minutes of a meeting. A very effective secretary doing minutes of a meeting could be sufficient, and you don't need to hire a separate computer-assisted note-taker. But not everybody who takes minutes keeps up with everything that's going on. They only write down the motions and the votes, and they don't have the discussion. Well, that's not useful for the deaf person because, okay, I know what the result of the vote was, but I don't know why everybody liked that idea. In fact, I'm not quite sure what the idea fully was, right? And so this ends up being the frustration. Here's the advantage. The computer-assisted note-taker usually is only working one way. You're working from the spoken message into a visually typed message, because if the deaf person wishes to say anything, they raise their hand, they stand up, they speak. And then, as the answer comes back down, they nod their head, sit down, and quickly read the screen. And especially if it's interactive, they need it to be pretty quick, especially if they're still embarrassed about their deafness. But not everybody who takes minutes keeps up with everything that's going on. They only write down the motions and the votes, and they don't have the discussion. Well, that's not useful for the deaf person, because, okay, I know what the vote was, but I don't know why everybody liked that idea. In fact, I'm not quite sure what the idea fully was, right? And so this ends up being the frustration. Here's the advantage. The computer-assisted note-taker usually is only working one way. You're working from the spoken message into a visually typed message, because if the deaf person wishes to say anything, they raise their hand, they stand up, they speak. And then, as the answer comes back down, they nod their head, sit down, and quickly read the screen. And especially if it's interactive, they need it to be pretty quick, especially if they're still embarrassed about their deafness and want to pretend that they're just sitting next to this avid note taker who happens to be there, who has nothing to do with this person here, who happens to be quite hard of hearing. And just, wasn't it fortunate that you're sitting next to the person with the keyboard who's typing everything? Yeah, I actually paid for their service, but you don't need to know that. So it is a paid service. It's rare. If you're good at it, you need to advertise that you do it. There's no certification for it. And there's, you have the flexibility of doing it to the consumer's preferences. If they don't want abbreviation, okay, great. You might have to summarize more than being a verbatim representative, being a verbatim typist. The faster typing skills you have, the better off you are. Here's another little trick about computer-assisted note-taking. When you have a live consumer with you, I have found that I don't need to correct everything. That I can start a word, I have a typo, a 1 or 2 letter off of the message. I start to backspace to correct it, but the deaf person said, it's okay, I know what you mean. Keep going. They don't care if I correct it. They already got the understanding of the message. Keep going. You're not going to have the advantage of that unless you have somebody in your home or office or wherever you're practicing this process. If they can either deafen up or you use headphones, for the source text so that they don't have access to it and they're completely dependent on your message. It is really essential if you're going to be a good provider of the service, it's really essential that you have practice with somebody with you, next to you, who's watching your live work and not a transcript when you're done. Because the whole point of this being effective is that the visual aids are recorded while you're doing this. Once you're done, you have a transcript and the visual aids aren't in it. So for a summary of a meeting, that's useful, and a good computer-assisted note-taker should be paid time to edit the transcript for the purpose of the meeting minutes or other documentation of activities. Right? Yes, you get paid per hour for doing the service, and then you should be reimbursed for any editing work that you do afterwards. And you should be the one to do the editing, because you know what you were trying to type when you did the keystrokes, and maybe have some misspellings, and maybe there are abbreviations that aren't obvious, but you know what they mean, and you can expand them out into a full text that isn't so choppy and makes sense to somebody who wasn't in the room at the time. So that's the key. Good computer-assisted note-taking is a live event done in a context so that it closes the gap for a late deafened adult. It can then be further modified and expanded so that it becomes a useful documentation of an event that a person is no longer able to access, and that they can understand something that took place in the past. That's normally not what interpreters do, right? We don't normally provide information for a person who's not present. That's translation work, and that's a different process. And it can be more frustrating because you don't know what your consumer's preferences are. So there you go, good computer-assisted note-taking. Consumers in a room, they can tell you what's working. So practice that way. Have somebody be a consumer of your service. They don't have to be deaf. They're probably already a native speaker of English, so there you go with that. And as long as they can't hear the source text, but they can see the video that you're transcribing or that you're typing up, if you just don't have the captioning turned on, right? Now, if you're deaf or hard of hearing and you're practicing this work, you need the captioning so you know what the message says. So you just simply have them, I don't know, sit where they can't see the captioning. It really is useful if they can see the visual aids. That's the complete picture of how most computer-assisted note-taking is successfully done. That's it for now. See you on the next one.